So one of the main challenges that we faced is to stay one step ahead of the spread of the virus, because as we know, if we begin to act only after there's confirmed cases, like what happened in Israel, then it already may be too late, and we may lose control of the epidemic because of the cycles of infection that have already occurred. So what we'd like to do ideally is to come up with a solution that would allow us to detect regions of spread of the virus ahead of time so that we could flatten the curve even further. And we at the Weizmann Institute asked whether we can use population-wide 1-minute surveys in order to predict ahead of time regions of outbreak. So we set up a very simple chatbot that every person can answer in about a minute that asks about symptoms that we know are associated with coronavirus infection. And then what this system allows us to do is to obtain a real-time map of high-risk outbreak regions at the entire level of the country, at the city and neighborhood levels. It allows us to predict regions of spreading of the virus ahead of time. It allows us to evaluate the effectiveness of various measures, lockdown measures that we take. And it also allows us to come up and gain more insight into symptoms that people develop and better prioritize individuals for testing. We started this very early on in the pandemic. Right when we started this, I believe we were the first in the world to start with these surveys. Several countries contacted us and wanted to replicate what we have done. So we formed together a consortium that we have led together now with 11 different countries, and this survey is now being deployed in all of these countries for exactly the same goals. We published a paper at a high-impact scientific journal, and we are forming a coalition of all of these countries to share insights and data and methods of working on this as has been done in other areas. And so I want to share with you a few of the insights that we obtained from this. So the first one was when we looked at the accumulative symptoms that we have in various cities here in Israel, we saw that the symptoms survey, which is shown here on the y-axis for various cities, versus on the x-axis, the number of newly confirmed cases that will occur 1 week after we look at the surveys, we saw a high correlation between regions where we knew symptoms are occurring in individuals and regions where newly confirmed patients will be identified in a week from now. And the reason is very simple. If you start to feel symptoms, then it'll take you a day or two until you decide to go to do a test, and then the test itself takes a few days to obtain a result until you get it, and so on. So by asking people with technology digitally in real time, we can already obtain this prediction of cities that will be ahead of time, regions where we'll identify newly confirmed cases. So we use this, and we shared this data with the Ministry of Health, which together with other information that it had, used it to control regions of spread of the virus. But beyond just predicting regions of outbreak, this tool also allowed us to obtain several additional insights. For example, when we take various actions, like the lockdown, very heavy lockdown that we did here in Israel, this tool allows us to track what happens to symptoms of individuals. And what we found is that right after we had the lockdown in mid-March, the symptom level of symptoms in individuals was relatively high, and then we saw a very sharp decline that occurred over the course of about a week to 7 days that allowed us to evaluate as another measure the effectiveness of the various lockdown operations that we have taken. And now that Israel is having a second wave, we can further evaluate the various actions, various limitations and restrictions that we put on the population in terms of how they affect various symptoms that people are feeling. And the final insight I want to share is that once you ask many people how they feel and what symptoms they develop, you can actually identify new symptoms that were not known before when you only ask, for example, hospitalized patients. And so early on, there were some reports that loss of taste and smell may be a symptom of the disease. So we added that to the survey. And indeed, what we saw over the course of collecting these surveys from 3 million people here in Israel is that actually loss of taste and smell was the single most distinguishable feature between those who have been infected with the virus and those who have not. So there's about a 35 times more chance that if you feel loss of taste and smell, then it is due to coronavirus infection as opposed to something else. For example, fever is something that is much more common to various other diseases, and so just having fever is less distinctive as compared to loss of taste and smell. And indeed, insights from the survey, both in Israel and the UK and other countries, have led to incorporating this symptom into the criteria for actually being tested. And furthermore, we were able to take all of these insights together and develop an algorithm that could better predict the result of a PCR test for coronavirus infection. And so now, digitally, online, people can fill out their symptoms, and the algorithm can predict for them and prioritize better who we should test for COVID-19 infection. And by that, we could more readily identify individuals who have been infected and better control the disease.